So it's me again, hello, but half of the room went for a coffee. However, I'm inviting my panelists to join me. Marta, please join me on stage, thank you. And Jeremy, Tomasz, and Dominik Lipka. Welcome. Actually, we sort of know each other, but not really, just by email. So please bear with us. We are going to have a similar structure to the previous one, but I think we are just going to continue the conversation, if you agree, because I have the impression that we didn't get to the solutions. So I would like to continue discussing until we have a solution. But of course, before we get to the solutions, maybe to help us a little bit, I would like to ask you just one question. First, we are going to do a short round of introductions, really short. You name your organization, who you represent, and then we would go to that question, so start thinking about it. How does good look like? So what is it that we are trying to achieve by doing what we are doing? Because I think that sometimes without knowing where we go, it's really difficult to say what the solution is and how we measure progress. So before we start talking about the key performance indicators, for which we have 40 minutes, the organizers ate 5 minutes from our time, which is very, very frustrating because we only have 40 minutes, but yet I think we can do it well. So we'll start with you, who you are.
Dominik Lipka. I have pleasure to represent Saivento Biotech. Saivento is a CDMO that is mainly focusing on development and clinical production, mRNA-based drug.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Yes, I'm Jeremy Launders. I'm CEO and President of the Management Board at Biotechnology SA.
Welcome, Tomasz.
Tomasz Dylong, European Commission Director General for Research and Innovation. So I have basically two functions. One is the policy making in research and innovation in health, and also designing the funding policy in plenty of areas of health research. Thanks.
And Marta.
Marta Winiarska. I'm leading Polish Union of Innovative Medical Biotech Companies. Companies focus on drug discovery, drug development, especially first-in-class, best-in-class, with Polish capital, but which needs support of many stakeholders around the Europe and also entire world. But we'll discuss it later. Yeah, and I think that's it.
Thank you. And the question is true for everybody, so it's the same Mentimeter as it was before. And you see the question here, what performance indicator, and I'll translate the question in a second, what performance indicator reflects a thriving life science ecosystem? Basically, what does it mean, a thriving ecosystem? Because I think that's what we sometimes struggle to say. We discussed a lot of solutions to a problem that we didn't define. Marta, what is a thriving ecosystem? How does good look like for you?
It's a really hard question. I think the ecosystem needs to bring the real support. And what does mean real support? The support which understands the specificity of all the actors which are in the sector, as well academia, as well startups, and as well bigger companies, which are all of them responsible for the bringing finally to the market the drugs, new drugs for patients. So sometimes I feel that we are trying to build our ecosystem, our regulations, based on kind of, I don't know, abstract assumptions, how we would like to reality be, not how is it in reality. So I think first we need to understand how the market works, what needs academia, what needs startups, how to translate R&D academia projects into business assets then, and how to bring then capital to develop those projects, and how to show those projects developed by mid-size enterprises or startups, how to show them to big pharma, to attract them with those projects, and how to bring them finally to the market. So good ecosystem means ecosystem which understands how the way looks like, how the reality looks like, and how they should create, how public administration should create the tools support each step on this journey.
Fantastic. So we've started with a trade organization. We continue with the companies of smaller and bigger size. Why don't we start with you? So for you.
It's a very, very tough question. I agree with Marta, and especially if you talk with investor. Yeah, it's very hard to tell what is the performance indicators. In my opinion, of course, it depends on the area how you look, even on the ecosystem. Because if you are thinking about innovation, of course, science and innovation, you could think about how many publications we've got in how many patents granted. I don't know, but at the end, if we're thinking about something different, how we change the market, how we change the, how our solution could change thinking about some specific therapies. So everybody's got their own specific indicators. It is completely different for the academia, completely different for the companies. I will say nothing new, the funding, how we spend the money. Yeah, because once I heard, if you fund it, you will find it. And that's true. So the way how we spend the money, the way how we can spend the money, on the previous session we talked a lot about the time. And this is the only thing that we cannot buy. So we need to be, the time, the speed, how fast we act is also very, very important.
Jeremy.
Okay, I think the guys did a good job at starting at the beginning of the process, which is R&D, the number of new product approvals. When we talk about key performance indicators, we're talking about what we measure to tell us if we're being successful. So obviously the number of ongoing clinical trials, the number of approved patents versus the number of patents applied for, etc. Moving into, I would say, let's say, collaborations between public and private sectors, okay? I think supply chain resilience is very important. So if we come with new innovative therapies, it's one thing to create a patent, but we need to commercialize these products, and we need to commercialize them within the EU. Now, if we already have a problem, and I think from listening to some of the earlier sessions, you can see that we do. And what is the problem? The problem is supply chain resilience. We have 250 medicines made it onto the critical medicines list for the EU, and 80% of the API is actually manufactured in India and China. So when we get a new innovative therapy coming and developed in Europe, how are we going to commercialize it when we don't have the capability and the capacity within the EU for the API? So I think for me, the percentage of domestic API produced is very important. And again, I would move on through the phases to say that country-to-country collaboration is very important. So not just public to private sector, but also within the EU, having collaboration, cross-border collaboration. Regulatory reform is important, but we can reform the regulation, we can write the piece of paper, but the implementation of that is extremely important. How quickly can we implement the new regulations if they are reformed? I think we need to look at different regulatory pathways. So, for example, it won't be a surprise we produce insulin at Bioton. We can supply the entire European market. I do not want to have to go and spend millions and millions and millions on clinical trials for a product that's been in the market for 20 years. There's an established use pathway that we could take and supply the entire European Union with insulin. Now, some people will say, insulin's an old drug, it's not innovative, it's not. But, you know, we need to remember what they want to have, that as a baseline therapy, or more expensive products that are made in the US or made by US companies. So then I just to finish off on my point here, I would think, you know, from a regulatory reform perspective, I think patient access to medicines is very important. And what I mean by there is, when we do have products EMA approved, how long does it take to get them from that part onto the reimbursement list in the various countries? And these are all things we can measure to reflect on our thriving life sciences ecosystem.
Thank you, and thank you also for taking it like end to end, and we would come to the different pieces of the value chain, because I think that there might be some notable differences between different types of companies, different sizes of companies, but there are some principles that you've outlined that would probably apply across the board. Tomek.
Thank you. So let me start from the disclaimer that I was not part of the previous session and I did not listen to it. So maybe certain things were discussed there already. So starting from this definition of this thriving life science ecosystem, I think it's pretty similar for me to what other speakers already mentioned, is that it would be great to have a system in which if there is a great idea, it has the reasonable chance of getting from early research up to the ready product in a good timing. And conversely, if there is an idea which is poor and has no chance or no value from the clinical or financial perspective, sorry, let it be killed quickly and early in the process, because I also know that this attrition rate is painful, and the earlier products which have no chance, the earlier they disappear from the pathway, the more space there is for others. So for that, we need a number of elements. Of course, many were mentioned. It includes the regulatory system. It includes the reimbursement system, which, of course, yes, it has to be agile. Absolutely, this is absolutely necessary. And also for us, when I look at it from the perspective of a public funder of research, we care equally about the return on investment. And we manage taxpayers' money. So to us, the return on investment is if that investment goes back to the citizens, including patients. It may be prevention, it may be treatment, it may be whatever measures which help citizens to stay healthy or as healthy as possible. So let me express this clearly. If the process is long and inefficient, it is also frustrating to us as the public funder of health research.
Thank you. There are some suggestions of how to measure, and this is about numbers of phase 1 trials, number of commercialized products, which I think some of you have mentioned, blockbuster partnering deals, market approvals. I think all of that is true, and these are important metrics. We've also talked about in the previous session, and I'm quite happy to have a bis repetita from that. That's not a problem at all. What are the solutions in order to get there? So if we know what we try to achieve, what is that 1 or 2 recommendations that you would make for the European Union that is now embarking on quite important reforms? Pharmaceutical legislation, life science strategy, upcoming Biotech Act, quite significant simplification exercise that is going on, the Critical Medicines Act, the European Research Strategy, and many, many others coming. I think Irene showed them on the slides today. What is it that in order to achieve what you've said, and then I'll try to translate it into some numbers, what is it that you would propose as a solution for the European Union to implement through one of these initiatives? And let's start again with you, Marta.
Again, very hard question, but I wrote down some points, what in my opinion, from my perspective, we should measure. And first point, it's translational output. How many academic projects results in IP transfer or spin-offs formation? And of course, here the solution is to create initiatives in order to network, to matchmake academia side and the business side, because I think that there are sometimes many interesting projects within universities or institutes, and it's really hard to go with those ideas to business and show what interesting data, what interesting project we have. And I have not ready answer what kind of initiatives it should be, but we should focus on how in reality we can change this, because as well for startup, as well for academic teams, it's really hard to go to bigger business and to discuss the cooperation. Clinical progress, how many locally developed therapies reach phase 1, 2 with local sponsors. And I would connect this point with my point for private investment levels. Are private investors willing to engage in early stage biotech? Because engaging private investors in those early stages, it's about good private-public partnership, because good public regulation, good public grant system, funding system, it's de-risking private investors. So I think it's absolutely crucial to make them willing invest in those early stage biotech. And time to commercial readiness, it's another point on my list. How long from proof of concept to the point where the licensing, sale or partnering is feasible? And it's about regulations, of course, but it's also about cooperation, because not every single European company would be able to bring alone to the first or second phase of clinical trials R&D projects. So again, networking and matchmaking, how to make it effective, and how we as a European Union can go to the local level and show the R&D projects to the partners who can accelerate them. And infrastructure scale, it's about facilities, laboratories, equipment for example, preclinical CROs who are the partners for the biotech companies focus on drug discovery and drug development, but of course also infrastructure, national European capabilities for pre-GMP, pilot GMP, clinical manufacturing. But what is here really important, that creating the grants ecosystem, we cannot await that this kind of infrastructure will be created by startups or mid-sized entrepreneurs, but we need to see entire ecosystem. We need to have this kind of infrastructure in entire ecosystem and think how to link good ideas, good R&D projects with this infrastructure, not await that the innovators will develop always this kind of infrastructure.
I think that points to the next multi-annual financial framework and how what funding tools and what is the scope of the funding could be addressed. For example, what you are saying about infrastructures that should not rely on grants but be sustainably funded, not just through services but also for their expansion and to enable support to startups and small companies. And the money for partnering differently in a more agile way, so new partnering tools, not necessarily institutional joint undertakings, but all types of partnering in the future. So that's what I'm hearing from you. So what Europe can do is just to provide the tools and the funding and to make sure that competitiveness aspects are funded through that, not just grants for research, but also for enabling the ecosystem, right? Is that what I'm hearing from you? Jeremy, before I would not ask Tomasz yet. Tomasz would then tell us what the Commission can do as opposed to what we want the Commission to do. Jeremy, what do you want the Commission to do?
I would like to see some harmonization. So across all levels, let's take funding, for example. The funding comes from the EU and it comes into each EU member state, and then each EU member state has its own number of different programs and mechanisms for releasing that funding into the startups, into the universities, etc. But there's no standard and consistent way. So I'd like to see some harmonization there. We recently put in an application for ABM for the EMA approval for our insulin, and we got awarded the actual project based on the points, but because of some financial criteria in the company, we couldn't access the money. The money was handed back to the EU. So it didn't get used, and here we are saying that we have, again, 80% of our APIs used in the EU in our 250 drugs on the critical medicines list come from China and India, and an EU company can't get approval to get its insulin approved by the EMA. So that's important. Harmonization in the regulations. I think we need to simplify things massively. And we talked about going faster. I think that's very important. I think the regulations are starting to drive business decisions, so it's having a reverse negative impact. One example would be semaglutide, for example, and everyone in the room, I assume, has heard of Ozempic and semaglutide, and we know that the patent is expiring in around 2032. So companies like Bioton and other insulin companies are already starting to think how we go about producing this. And when we look at it, we say, okay, if I make a biosimilar version of semaglutide, I've got to go through a centralized pathway. It's going to take me forever, okay? And it's going to take a lot of money, and it'll probably never be commercialized. However, if I take the peptide version of that, I can go through a decentralized pathway. And what does that force us to do? It forces us to go back and buy the API from companies like Dr. Reddy's, etc., companies in India and China. And so the regulations are having some sort of negative reverse impact on the business decisions that businesses are making in terms of the products that they've developed. I talked earlier on, previously in a previous seminar about how we utilize the funding. And I think, we talked about the number of, let's say, new innovative projects, how many projects are in clinical phase 1, 2, 3, what's the speed we can get through those. I think the EU should take a step back and look at the key projects for the European Union, the key therapies that are required. So we're self-sustaining and not relying on India and China, and then look at how they can apply the funding in a standardized way to see that project from end to end. That would highly support the actual commercialization within the EU.
I think I hear you on the side of generic and biosimilar drugs, and it's true that most of the points that you've raised would apply there. I would like to also highlight that the innovation might require, because it needs to continue, would require also other measures. And on the manufacturing, most of the APIs for innovative drugs come from Europe and not necessarily India and China. And even the US is claiming that they are in trouble because they need to import from Europe the APIs rather than from other regions. Yet, modernization of manufacturing is not rewarded in any way. And I think that's true for both generic and innovative medicines. So there is something to be done on simplification. There is something to be done on incentives for a number of activities. Dominic, what do you think?
At the beginning, I not agree with you related with this API production in Europe and export.
We have figures.
Yeah, but I will tell you something. I don't know, everybody remember the COVID pandemic and the first COVID vaccine from BioNTech and Pfizer. I don't know if you remember also the time, because the vaccine was developed in Europe by BioNTech. Who received the COVID vaccine first? United States. Why? Because Pfizer produced it. So this is something that is also very important, especially if you look at very innovative therapies. I don't think that Europe is leading the way with the manufacturing capacity. And I'm sure about it. If you, for example, if we talk about the mRNA, no, it's not like that. If we talk about the oligonucleotides, the same. But we also need to think that especially about the supply chain. Okay, we can produce, for example, ibuprofen in Europe, but the solvent, the reagents, and all that stuff will come from China, India, and all that countries. So it's, I think, not that we expect it should how it should work. This is one thing. Second thing. What European Commission should think about it, of course, legislation is very important. And I will stay also with mRNA. FDA consider mRNA technology as a platform technology. European Union, if you talk with EMA about it, they don't even want to hear the platform technology, what it is. You know how it speeds up the process of clinical development of the drug. In Europe, we don't have such a solution. So this is very important. The funding, also how we fund the projects that are with high risk, especially at the beginning, because if we are talking about the biomanufacturing, so there will be no biomanufacturing in Europe if we don't have innovative programs that unfortunately requires public money, because without that, it will not happen. So everything is connected in every life cycle of the product development. So we need to look from the beginning and ending if you want to have the number of commercialization high, if we want to compete with the United States, China, or even Japan.
I've had this conversation recently with our research group, and I've asked them the question, how would you measure a progress towards a good ecosystem in Europe? And they said the following. So, for example, EMA, I would know that Europe succeeded because EMA is the first or the second where companies would turn for marketing authorization, because it has fantastic support, because it has fast-track approvals, because it looks at platforms, and indeed the platforms came about. There is a little bit about platform technology master files in the new pharmaceutical legislation, but mostly in relation to CMC and quality, not for the entire life cycle. So these are the things that people say. So EMA is the first or the second, and by the way, if the central approvals become very, very effective, then there would be less utilization of national approvals and variations and all of that. So that's first thing. The second, it is the length of the process for clinical trials, and say if we could be as fast as Spain, and Spain is the fastest in Europe, and better, as fast as China and the US in order to approve, that is the way to measure a successful Europe. That would require some changes in the legislation. That would require also more reliance. That would require more ethical reviews coordination, but that is possible. It is possible even today. The third one was around Class A investments, because, without that, you don't have really thriving biotechs. And the last one was around manufacturing. And here I would bring one of the points that you've made. It is about companies continuing investments because the investments are encouraged and rewarded. From the four that I mentioned, is there something that is missing in terms of, yes?
What is missing in terms of funding of manufacturing facilities is a law, European law, that excludes companies which are manufacturing drugs, biotech and chemical drugs from funding these companies that are located in highly developed areas. Normally, pharma industry is located not in the middle of nowhere, not in the fields, not in the forest, but close to the universities, close to people that can work in laboratories, in pharma manufacturing facilities, mostly with the high education. And this is actually the law that requires very fast redefinition, especially when we are talking about resilience, when we're talking about safety, about drug safety, health safety, and when we have substantially support development of manufacturing facilities to provide Europe at least with more critical products than those mentioned by Jeremy.
Thank you. Any comment from the panel? And I'll come back, Tomek, to you in a second. Anything that's missing from the four or in addition to what was just said?
I just add to that point, if I could, very quickly. I'm originally from Ireland. Again, every country has a different model. In Ireland, what they did to attract foreign direct investment in the pharmaceutical area was they obviously reduced the corporation tax rates. And then after that, what they did, or maybe in parallel, they made sure that they had the skilled workforces. So they partnered, the government partnered with the universities. And as Joanna there in the audience just said, the companies were built on the doorsteps of the universities. Okay, so literally those students coming out of the fourth or fifth year, whatever, they were guaranteed a job and they went straight into the industry. We have the National Research Institute of Biotech, which has scaled down models of biotech facilities, and those students go straight in there for 3 months, and then they go into the industry. So I agree, you're not going to find the biotech facilities in the middle of the forest or whatever. It needs to be, close to the close access to the skills and the labor that's required. So completely agree with that point.
And it's not just Ireland, Singapore, I think, show exactly the same characteristics where actually, how did the companies say they just roll out the red carpet to us and they help us to establish the facilities, and there is a support to the points that somebody mentioned in the earlier session. There is a full administrative support. There is full support in establishing, in finding talents, in building the plans and in running the plans. And this is the way that goes. And I completely agree with you that we cannot apply the rule of structural funds and disadvantaged economic areas, because this is not where these plans would be built. So while you are thinking, please feel free to send us your questions or to just raise your hand and I would come with the microphone. Shall we just come back to Tomek? So what is possible now? And do you have any suggestion for the member states? Because it's not just about the European Union, it's also about the countries. You can throw the ball to their court.
So should I be bold?
Please do, absolutely.
Then member states, please just help us. That would be it. We can take it one by one, of course. Regarding the funding, we are doing absolutely what we can. Our problem is, as usual, limited resources, limited funding. When you look at the total budgets, the budget for research managed by the European Union is probably around 5 to 10% of the total funding available for research in Europe. The rest is with private companies, foundations, and at the level of member states. So, as Irene mentioned this morning, we are now entering the discussion of the next financial framework, which will be valid for 7 years. And there will be absolutely fierce discussion about the budget dedicated to research, because the union budget is not unlimited. You have to cut out. When you cut out from one part, the funding remains limited for another part. And we are funded from the contributions from member states. So it is always a fight for the allocation of resources to certain areas. That's why, to the extent possible, please help us getting the next framework program as large as possible. For the legislation, there are a number of initiatives going. Already the LifeScience strategy will be published early July, but it will be an umbrella communication. So it will announce certain actions, also hopefully answering to the calls for simplified regulatory processes and support. But the most tangible regulatory revisions will take place a bit later. Let me give you 2 examples. The first one will be the currently ongoing targeted evaluation of medical device regulation and in vitro medical device regulation. There was a public call, a public consultation with, I think, 600 submissions, and we are aware of the difficulties faced by the developers in relation to these 2 legislations, so this is going to be taken care of. And another legal act will be the so-called Biotech Act. Part of that will be legislative, and it will go broader than only health. So one of the idea and hope is that the Biotech Act will help clarify the inconsistencies, overlaps, contradictions, call it whatever you want, between certain pieces of legislations. For instance, between the pharma, GMO, medical devices, can be other types, pesticides and so on. It will also be preceded by the consultation and impact analysis. So at that stage, please do submit the issues that you see. And it will help us do things better compared to what we have right now. Then these will be high-level legislations. Of course, certain part of the implementation will be, again, in the hands of the member states, locally notified bodies who are scattered across Europe. It goes the same. I'm also a citizen, surely a future patient and user of all these technologies. If all these processes for approval, reimbursement would be handled more centrally, it would facilitate the lives of everyone, including us in the EU, because we are feeling those frustrations and we are also facing certain limitations in our activities. That's why the way, as Magda suggested at a certain moment, if there are coalitions of the willing to get things done a certain way to the extent possible and allowed by the legislations, yeah, let's try these ways, absolutely.
So let me be a little bit controversial here. Let me be bold. Marta, Dominik, you hear Biotech Act and Jem, you hear Biotech Act, proposal 2026, 1.5 year of legislative proposal, 2 years of implementation, effects at the earliest 2029. Fast enough?
Hopefully I'm still alive to see it.
Not fast enough, but really connected in the future problems it would create. But we have problems now, and following your previous question, I would say that EU is as smart or unsmart, it's as effective or ineffective, or it's so strong or as weak as its member countries. And I'm pretty sure that at European level there is no awareness how some European Union initiatives are implemented in specific countries. Of course, I would give you example of Poland. And grant system today. For example, in US, when you say, okay, we have developing RNA therapy for glioblastoma, they ask you, okay, what data do you have? What team, yeah? What do you need to support your project? And what about ask you in Poland? Do you have 30% revenue matching your project costs? Okay, and this is this kind of mindset. We Polish public authorities, even they are on the daily basis cooperating with the European Union administration, they absolutely forget who stands behind most of innovative drugs and therapies. There are startups and there are mid-sized enterprises who then cooperate with big pharma and bring those solutions to the market. But we need to remember what kind of technologies we have in Poland, we have in Europe. Still, we have many companies who are developing small molecules which are absolutely first in class, which are absolutely best in class, which can change the paradigm of treating many diseases. And there is somebody in the government or in the public authorities who say, okay, we don't like to sponsor any small molecules because on the European level somebody didn't write it directly that this is biotechnology. Okay, but we are thinking about the goal, about treating patient effectively, or we think about the specific technology we want to support. So if we see our goal we want to achieve, then we can take the right paths to go there. And sometimes I feel that goal is here and path is here, and we really need to conduct the dialogue, not only to say, okay, tick, we did the dialogue with the business, but to understand how the business and how the market works, to bring the right solutions. And really, China is catching up fast. They approved to record, I think, 48 first-in-class therapies in 2023. They have mega funds, they have regulatory reform, global talent recruitment, everything. And this is the strategic decision. If we have goal here, just build the path there.
Health outcomes, continuity of supply, continuity of innovation. I think that's what we are talking about. Dominik, I turn to you for 1 minute and then we'll try to close.
I will be very fast. So I think what we need to do, I agree with Marta, there is a huge gap between the decision makers and the biotech business. It cannot be like that they don't hear what is needed. And this is the biggest issue. The biotech business says something and they, okay, nice, but we know better. And this is the biggest issue.
So we are adding to the list of wishes, listen to the business and work with us.
And also looking from the point of view of European Union at the national level, how their initiatives are implemented on the national levels, because with the numbers on the paper, maybe it looks good, But I think that maybe sometimes they should send their experts to talk with the companies who take grants or try to take grants from European funds, and I think better understand then where are the gaps.
I think a number of solutions, first performance indicators, but also a number of solutions came from this panel, from the previous discussion. I would like to thank you very much, and please join me in a round of applause for our panel. Thank you.